Hello and welcome back to my studio. We're going to do a little painting demonstration today in gouache paint, and it's a beach scene that doesn't go entirely to plan, but we pull it together in the end. Well, I hope so. So stick around and watch for yourself, and I'll give you lots of painting tips along the way. Now, before I jump into the painting demonstration, I've got a little Black Friday bundle special as well. You'll find that in a link below. So take a moment to have a look at that while it's still available. Okay, now this scene is pretty much a standard sort of beach scene, but I wanted to bring in the warmth of the light, and I guess every painting is about the light. Don't get distracted by shapes and objects that are not going to help you convey a strong light effect. Now, I do improvise a little to try and get a stronger light effect using color and, of course, values, light and dark, and with the color temperatures of warm and cool. Right, let's have a look at how this painting developed and little decisions I had to make along the way to try and get this painting looking a little bit better than it was heading. I hope you enjoy it. Alright, I'm using some Fabriano paper, 300 gram cold pressed, and a few extra colors like turquoise, but mostly my standard gouache palette. Always starting with the horizon line and then doing a quick drawing in pencil to establish the composition. Nothing too difficult about the composition. Just get that in pretty quickly. Then starting off with the shadow in the foreground. Generally, with any opaque medium, it's good to start with the shadow or the darkest darks. But I believe that getting your shadow pattern in at the beginning of your painting is vital. It does determine the direction of your painting. And of course, if you're painting outdoors, shadows change very quickly, so get them all in. It's always good to remember that generally it is the shadow that attracts you to a scene. Or more correctly, the contrast between that shadow and the light. Now this is the block-in stage I'm using with a square synthetic brush, just an ordinary watercolor or acrylic brush like this, and that's what you need to cover a lot of space pretty quickly. So this is kind of a pink mixture, orange, white, and it's getting just that warmth that I'm trying to capture on the beach. But of course, far away, as in that headland, I've got to just cool that color down a little, so a little more white and blue will come into that. But in the foreground, we want it warmer. So the warmer color will rise up to the viewer and the cool color will fall away from the viewer, and that gives the illusion of perspective or depth or distance, whatever you want to call it, but it's how you use color temperature that makes a big difference. Now there's a nice element of warmth. Some foliage showing at the sort of midpoint on the right hand side, and I'm going to lean that all to warm colors. Just by emphasizing the warmth, I may be able to get a little more interest out of this painting. Very small format, of course. This is about a 6x8 size that I'm going to be working on. So you got to try and put in the important elements. That's going to make all the difference. The reflections on the sand Well, of course, that's reflecting mostly the sky. So similar sky colors, but of course, being a reflection, it'll be slightly darker than the sky. Actually, my sky is fairly dark already. That's because of the nature of gouache just drying away. So I'll be going over the sky colors a bit, adding some of those clouds and just trying to lighten it up. Now, when you look at the sea, all you really picking up there are the foaming water, but I put in a dark to create some waves, a bit of contrast. Now I've put some cloud in there in the sky, but it's not quite enough. But anyway, let's move on. Just keep developing the painting. The foliage on the distant dunes are nice and warm from that afternoon light. So that's just a bit of blue, yellow, and a touch of that orange. A lot of the harmony of the colors comes from the fact that you are using a small palette of color, and most of your colors have some mix of the other colors that are already there, and that's how harmony is created. So let's just get that sky lightened up a bit more and get that value of the sky a bit more accurate, using cerulean blue and titanium white for the sky and just brightening that up a bit. Now it will read more correctly compared to the reflection in the sea, which will be a little darker. Reflection's always a little darker than the source of the light itself. Let's finish that up. That's a little bit more impressionist, and a few highlights on the clouds. Improvising that a little. I could just warm that up a touch more, but we'll focus on the beach. There are some buildings in the distance which remind me of kind of a European scene, maybe Italy, Spain, something like that. But of course these are modern blocks of apartments, but I'm going to try and make them look a little more romantic. Just getting the red roofs in, the red being broken just a bit with a little bit of that orange and white so they're not too bright. The buildings catching quite a lot of light as well, so I must make them nice and warm. Don't use white straight out the tube, add something to it. Could be a bit of yellow, some of that primary yellow, or a little touch of orange to get that ambient light effect. And see how nicely they stand out there, and a few little bright spots out in the dunes. So because gouache dries pretty quickly and always dries a little darker, I tend to go back in where I'm not quite satisfied with the vibrancy or the value contrast. I'll go back in and touch up. Adjust the value a little lighter if necessary, or warm a color up. But it's seldom that the color is perfect first time out, and this is why I like gouache, because it involves lots of layering, which is how I do my oil painting, applying layer after layer to get the effect I'm looking for. Getting some highlights in the middle distance, but it's also quite cool, so that's going to push the beach down and away. And as I work into the foreground area, I'll be warming that up as we go. Now I'm using a medium-sized brush and then swapping to my little Winsor & Newton sable brush for these smaller areas, just some sort of wet sand color, which is kind of an alizarin, pinkish alizarin color. Suggestion of water in the distance, a cool white will do that. And then trying to develop the foreground reflection now. Quite light, but not as light as the sky. It's a fine line, of course. All you got to do is try and create the illusion. So these little inlets of water creating different little shapes, it's quite a challenge. I want to give the impression of water rushing in and receding down the beach, and it can really get your attention and get you working over and over. Starting to suggest some of these wave shapes. The darks of the wave, obviously the waves that are standing up and are then in mostly in shadow, and then you can add really nice highlights. It's at this point that I realize there's a major problem with this painting. I'm getting distracted by all the little details in the sea water. As a result, the painting is going nowhere and I'm forgetting the main object, and that is to focus on the light. It's time for a coffee break and then come back and salvage this painting and get something with a bit more punch going on. Let's take another look at trying to get this painting back on track. Alright, so what I'm missing here is good, strong dark, and I need that in the foreground. These shadows just not enough, and I didn't want to get into painting all these twigs and sticks in the foreground, so I'm consolidating that into a good, strong, dark shape, and then I'll bring some rich, warm colors into it. I say warm, warmer than the shadow, but it's basically cool reds and oranges that I'll pull into these shadows as well. Something I do a lot with oil painting and even acrylics, but it works with gouache too. So this is where I've got to improvise to get something extra out of this scene. As you can see in the reference, it doesn't have those reds, but the light is very warm, and with a little bit of emotional content, you could call it, you can bring in and accentuate that warm light. A little bit more of the primary yellow and orange and white to get this warmth in the foreground I was talking about earlier, and you can already see how that is starting to stand out nicely against the darks in the foreground. So getting a little more energy into this painting now, and I must say I was feeling a little bit down about it until getting this strong dark in the foreground. And that's sometimes all you need, and the painting can go from pretty dreary to something a little more interesting. A few little sparks and spots of light, so important, but not to overdo them, just to catch the eye and take it in. Something to keep the eye interested. Just taking these little bits of foliage a bit higher to overlap the distant buildings, and of course overlaps help to create more sense of distance and that perspective that we want. A few little sparks of orange and red standing out nicely against those darks. This edge is a bit of a challenge. I don't want it too hard either, but I need to just develop it. If you're not sure about one area, go work in another area and then come back. Try not to fixate on one spot throughout the painting. A few little sky holes, let the air through, and I think that works out okay. I do like these touches of warm, rich color, especially when it's against blues and blue violets. Remember complementary colors. These oranges are making the blues stand out. The blue of the sea and the sky, and then the dark purples and blue violets. All of these complementary color relationships are so important. The yellowish light on the foreground beach and the blue violet in the shadow, of course, another complementary color. A little more sparkle in the water. Use your titanium white with a little touch of perhaps yellow ochre or some primary yellow, but warm it up slightly. If you want water to look like it's catching sunlight, you need to add a warm color to it. Soften that edge just a little of the shadow. I think that's looks a little better there. Just to add some interest and scale, a tiny figure at the bottom of the beach. And then I'm pretty much done with this painting. I think it's come off. It really is a sketch, but turned out better than it was heading in the beginning anyway. I still think I'll work on this shadow a little more. Let's get a bit of warm light reflection into the foreground sea. A few little elements suggesting the waves curling over and just harmonizing those warm orange colors with the blue sea colors. Trying always to simplify a shape as well. If there's too many fussy details, go over it, simplify the shape. Alright, I just want to get some softer transition into the shadow. I could cut in with some of the beach color and suggest a few scar holes in the shadow itself, but maybe next time. I don't see that on the reference, so I'm really trying to stick to the reference to some degree and let it inspire me. I think the shadow is getting a bit more variety and looking more part of the scene, I would say. Amazing how a little sketch like this can teach you so much. Well, I think it's looking all right, actually. I think I was going to give up on this one, but it's come through. It's got a nice few little sparks of light. The blue and orange complementary colors, I think, work nicely together. So we got an impression of afternoon light on the beach. Just a little shadow to finish that off, and I'll call it a day. Okay, in the end, I was happy with how this little sketch turned out. And I recommend doing little sketches like this, sort of a 6x8 or 10x12 at the biggest. They really help you to focus on what's important, and not trying to fill up lots of space and then you resort to irrelevant details. So look at the light, look at the lights and darks, warm and cool color, complementary colors and how they can help each other. And focus on those big elements. And then do lots of these sketches. If you're starting out, I recommend you do, let's say, 10 of these a month. If you can manage that, you're going to improve your painting rapidly. That's what it comes down to. Just doing the work and as often as you can. And of course, remember to watch videos on this channel. So now's a good time to subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget the free course for you up here. And I've got plenty of other painting courses on my school site as well. So take a moment and have a look at those. Well, until next time, enjoy your painting and we'll chat again soon. Cheers for now.